Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Volleyball in Perspective. I'm Scott Harris, and I'm your host for the annual event that has been put together to help you become familiar with the enshrinees to the Volleyball Hall of Fame, which is located right here in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So we're going to speak with some members from the class of 2007, but first, which is actually a first for Volleyball in Perspective, we're going to go back a decade because I'm sitting with Monaco, and he is a member of the enshrinement class of 1997, and since then has become the president of USA Volleyball. Al, welcome, and how are you?
Thank you, Scott. I'm fine and always happy to be here in Holyoke.
And it's a pleasure to have you. Now, when you talk about being here in Holyoke, this is a return trip for you. Let's talk about what it's like, volleyball, kind of a history and what you've played in it.
Well, I started too many years ago to really count, but in the late 1950s and early 1960s, I was a decent player. Once I finished law school and the volleyball leadership found out they had a young available attorney, they asked me to do some work, and since then I've been in administration, so that's about 40 years.
Was volleyball part of, let's say, maybe a method for you to be able to gain your legal education? I mean, athletic scholarships, I don't know if volleyball in your day was something that you could use as a tool to help you to higher education.
It was club volleyball back then, and I played a couple of different events for the University of California at a club level. I was principally a baseball player, and when I went to law school, I happened to have made some friends who were playing for the Olympic Club in San Francisco, and so I joined them in playing the game more seriously at a club level.
Now, there are a lot of things as we learn about volleyball that I think at one time it was kind of described as being a West Coast sport. And with it having its origins here in the East, I guess part of me kind of wonders, what is it about the West Coast that later found it to be, kind of one of their staples athletically?
I think it was the beach. It was the recreational aspect of it on the beach. And then that carried inside to the high schools along the coastline of California, the Southern California area. And it grew from there. But surprisingly, University of Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania had boys high school volleyball long before we associated volleyball with California.
Now, you were enshrined at the Hall of Fame 10 years ago, but you mentioned you've been playing the sport for what seems like forever. What is it that first got you involved in volleyball to where I would think it probably became your strongest sport, because you mentioned baseball was also part of your life?
Well, when I ran out of collegiate eligibility, I was looking for some competitive sport to fill my desire for sport competition. And volleyball was there. Some folks had introduced it to me while I was in college, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so from there we went ahead.
Now, from there we went ahead. Let's talk about some of the roads that you traveled as a result of being a volleyball player, and maybe some of the heights that you had gotten to with this as your sport.
Well, clearly the heights have been the leadership at the national level and our Olympic and international successes. As a player, I was good, but not a superstar. I was never on any Olympic team or national team, but I competed in national championships. I think the highlight has been my involvement in leadership and watching an organization that didn't put a team in the Olympic Games win gold medals at Olympic Games.
So you're the president for USA Volleyball. You've come up through the ranks a little bit, because I understand that you've done some legal stuff for them. You've been their executive director at some point. Are there some things about volleyball today as we know it that maybe you have had some influence in helping to motivate and change?
I would hope so. I would like to think so. Certainly the professional leadership, I was the first employee. I established many of the methods and systems we have in the office, many of the outreaches we have, national sponsors, international competitions, national teams, full-time or mostly full-time national teams. Now we call them professional teams. But back when you weren't supposed to be paying anybody, and we kind of did it under the table. But I'd like to think that much of what we do today has grown out of the foundations we created in 1973 and forward.
Now, we talk about the national level versus the professional level, and you always want to have the best athletes no matter what you title them to be. But how is it that somehow the world stage of volleyball kind of got ahead of us here in the U.S. for being us who invented the sport?
You have to go back to the Cold War, to the division between the communist socialist countries and the Western countries, and the ability of those in the socialist world to pay their athletes who held full-time jobs but didn't really go to those full-time jobs and were paid to play the sport, whereas we tried to be amateur under the old system and didn't pay them anything. And eventually the Olympic Committee made some changes, the International Olympic Committee, and allowed athletes across the board to be paid, and then we passed that stage of the socialist countries being the only ones who could keep athletes in the game full-time and pay them.
We talk a lot about the world stage for volleyball, and I know for some of the athletes who have, and probably maybe still play the sports, there are some things in their own countries that might make it difficult for them. I think that there are certain freedoms in the democracy that we've always had here in the United States where those difficulties may not be ours. But can you share a little bit about maybe some of the stumbling blocks that you had in trying to just maintain, your livelihood to some extent as a volleyball player?
As a player or as an administrator?
As a player. I'm going to ask you about the administrative aspects, but first I want to think about what it was you went through as a player, because maybe that might help me understand what led you to become an administrator.
Well, as a player, we were supposed to be amateurs, which meant you couldn't make a living at it. So you had to fit it in nights and weekends.
So livelihood is not the word I should have used.
Yeah, there was no livelihood from playing volleyball back then. You either were a beach bum, which gave some advantage to California kids who could play all season, all year long, or you were a professional of some kind. You held a job and you played only part-time. And it was difficult in the early years of us trying to put together national teams to have the athletes together and to have the athletes playing enough volleyball, especially on a world level, to be competitive.
Now, I think today when it comes to volleyball, with television and the like, we see the outdoors, the 2-on-2, the king of the beach. We see a lot of that, what the AVP has going on for volleyball. What is going on with our athletes in the United States where if it's not a world championship year or an Olympic year, what do they do to sustain themselves between peak level events?
Well, you don't notice all the peak level events because it's hard to get a share of the sport page and a share of the television. But we have major events every year. And our athletes are together late May through early fall on national team level every year. And they're receiving money from the United States involvement during that time frame. Then they go overseas and play with club teams in the top leagues in Europe or occasionally Brazil and some in Japan.
I mean, you could be kind of biased as president of USA Volleyball, but I'm sure because of your love for the sport, is there something that you would like to see to allow it to get a little more acclaim than just us kind of getting used to either an Olympic year or the 2-on-2 stuff that they tend to publish more often?
Well, we'd sure like to have a domestic league, and both for men and for women. But it's expensive. Travel is expensive. You don't want to be regional. And if you're going to be national, there's a lot of travel involved, and that's expensive. We know how many secondary sports, I'm saying secondary meaning not Major League Baseball, not NBA, not NFL type of stuff, have had difficult times. We watch soccer, and we know how difficult it's been for soccer to promote its sport and bring it up to Major League level. Yet we would like to do that, and we would like to have that problem of running a pro league that is established and gets press and gets television and gets noticed by the American public.
We talk about the monies that you take in as far as USA Volleyball, and I'm certain as a nation we do some things to be able to back our professional sports team. Are there other things out there, whether it's apparel manufacturers, just different product lines that would help to be able to funnel some cash to aid the efforts of USA Volleyball?
Sure, and we touch some of those outfits. In the past, in the distant past, we've had arrangements with leading beer companies, with leading automotive manufacturers. Interestingly, our principal apparel arrangement is with a Japanese company, with Mizuno Sport. The American companies don't seem to want to invest in volleyball at this stage, although they make volleyball equipment. They don't want to sponsor national teams. There are other avenues, and we use them as best we can. We're not as successful, obviously, as the major pro sports, but we understand why.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about yourself now, just as far as to what you've accomplished as an athlete. Being enshrined in the Volleyball Hall of Fame, I mean, that's big. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's certainly an achievement of a young dream. I was always inclined toward athletics. Baseball Hall of Fame was clearly a magical place for me. As I grew older, the Football Hall of Fame, the Basketball Hall of Fame, anybody who achieved success as an athlete was a real hero to me. So being enshrined in the Volleyball Hall of Fame is certainly a wonderful achievement. But I was enshrined mainly because I was a good leader and administrator and not because I was a player. I like to tell some of my cohorts who are in the Hall of Fame that if it weren't for me, they would have been only average players. And they were great because they had me to beat up on.
Okay. Well put, rather frank, but well put. So as far as to what you see in the changes for volleyball, and again, you've got some connection, you help to make some of the standards that we adjust by. I mean, what's coming down the road? We no longer serve per point, we serve for rally. It's not 15 points in a game. In some aspects, it's 30 points in a game. What's the next change we're going to see? Higher nets?
No, I don't think you're going to see much change on the floor. I think the game is pretty stabilized as we play it right now. There's no real move afoot to change the rules. The International Volleyball Federation is the determining body for rule changes, and there's nothing afoot there to change the game. Of course, what we'd like to see is more awareness of the game here in the United States. We'd like to see more hours on television, and some of those things are coming down the road. We have new agreements in place or being negotiated right now that will expose the game more in the United States, and we hope that increases the popularity and increases the quality of play at all levels.
Now, maybe this will bring me to backtracking just a little bit. Some of the changes in the game as we know it from how we knew it, is that to make it more television friendly, more
spectator friendly?
Is that
we thought it was more difficult for spectators to understand the old game and the old stricter rules, and also partly to package it for television, sure, to put it in a time box that was a little more predictable and a little more television friendly. And it's worked. I think it's worked. The game has great popularity, especially if you go to Europe and places in Asia. The houses are packed, and it's a real experience for them. It's a real event for them, just like we think of NBA or NFL tailgating. They're doing that kind of stuff for a volleyball match.
So just to maybe recircle what it was you had discussed about if there was some kind of a national league where almost like going out and watching, I mean, even Major League Lacrosse has somewhat of an audience. Maybe it would be nice if you can go to your local civic center and see, you know, a Western Massachusetts team or a Northern New York team that travels the country and competes. What are the possibilities of that ever becoming a reality?
There are some serious discussions going on right now, and there are some potential big name partners who are engaged in sport presentation, in entertainment presentation, who have an interest. And it just takes a while to make sure that we think of all the negatives and positives that we can exploit and determine whether the thing will work. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to be here next year, but there are serious talks with serious partners going on right now.
So money being the obvious, investors, is there something else? I mean, is education a key to drawing more of an interest with volleyball as a spectator sport?
Well, if you consider promotion being education, yeah, the public needs to understand the game a little more, understand how exciting it can be, how good the athletes are. Volleyball, although played by supposedly 24 million people a year in the United States, isn't all played at the highest levels. And like you and I have a sense of football or a sense of baseball because we played it when we were young on an organized team, we don't see that many people playing volleyball in an organized fashion, even in today's world. So they're not as aware of the quality of play and what's really going on the court in a high-level match.
In your career in volleyball, I'm certain you've seen a lot of things, gone through a lot of things, experienced some frustrations, maybe some of them even now because you're trying to grow the sport. Are there some things that you could just share for someone who would look and say, you know, why would I want to have a 20, 30, or 40-year experience in volleyball? Can you give me just some of the pros that if you had to look back and say, you know, this is why I did this and this is what I got from it?
Well, I did it because there was a challenge first for us to get qualified for the Olympic Games and then for us to be successful internationally. But I think the greatest pleasure to me has been the people I've met, the young athletes I've watched grow up, the travels throughout the world where I have friends in many, many different countries and, of course, throughout the United States. And I'm constantly coming in contact with those who I've spent 20 or 30 years being with. And that's not something everybody has. And I really, really take pleasure in the people, and particularly the young athletes who have grown up through the game and where they are in today's world and those relationships.
Al Monaco, enshrined in the Volleyball Hall of Fame, president of USA Volleyball. Is there another level for you tied to this sport?
After the Beijing Olympics, by fiat, I am retired. I've run out of elected roles to play. I'll be 70 years of age next year, and it's time for another generation to take over. I think we have some great people waiting to fill all those roles, and although it's hard to step aside, it's the right time, and we're in good hands. We have a good future.
Congratulations on all of your success, and thank you for chatting with me here today.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
With your retirement just around the corner, I want to congratulate you there too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.